Well, hi, good evening. Hello, Alaina Messineo, our playwright, and Craig Baldwin, our director of Water Doesn't Kill. Thank you for agreeing to chat with me for a bit.
Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
thanks for
Um,
having me.
yeah, it was a really, really beautiful film of this very lovely lyrical play. So it's a pleasure to have watched, and congratulations to both of you. Um,
Thank you.
let's talk. Let's first introduce Alaina, who is, I think, Alaina, you are in college. Is that right?
Yes, I am. I'm actually in my last semester. Very excited as a senior at Marymount Manhattan College in New York City.
Amazing. That's so great to hear. So, if you're only in college, then tell me about your. You must have been uh, either exposed or you must have developed an interest early as a young person in theater. And so, tell me a little bit about growing up in Rochester and what kind of a arts community it was.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really love Rochester. It has a very special place in my heart and a very, very robust arts and theater community. I was very, very, very fortunate in my youth to have been exposed to a plethora of mediums of arts, between dance and art and music and, singing and whatnot in the Webster School District. A really, really, really great, strong community with a lot of support. I began playing instruments and singing at a young age, and then continued, through my high school years and, a cappella and drama club
And you told
and
me
show.
that, sorry, didn't interrupt you, but you told me that Jiva also had a program for high school students.
They did, yes. They had a young writers program. I think I saw it. One of my English teachers sent me an email and was like, "Hey guys, anyone is interested of writing a play?" And I never written a play before, so I wrote up a little comedy called Bad Beans, and I sent it in, and I got a phone call in the summer, and they'd chosen one of my plays to be a part of their young writers showcase. So that was a great experience.
Wow, that's great. And who would thought think that Rochester necessarily would have that? But it sounds uh, like it was a great start. Craig, tell me about growing up in Australia for you and the and art and the support young artists had there and how you got into it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a um, big focus on extracurricular activities like theater and music and that sort of thing in schools here. It's a big part of people's education, and I was sort of lucky enough to engage with um, theater and music at that point. Actually, I almost became a composer. I almost went to the Conservatory of Music in Sydney and ended up not going and ended up in drama school in America, but that's a whole other story. Um, I think the tradition comes a little bit from England, although a lot of Aussies would complain for me saying that at this point because we've become our own culture, of course. Um, but the tradition comes from England, and it sort of means that we have something that's fairly state funded. It's not state funded enough. That state funding's sort of been slowly eroded over time. Um, all the theater companies here are doing it hard um, to survive. But because that was sort of the initial impulse here, um, it's always been, the arts have always been a part of Australian culture. It maybe hasn't got the attention that sports get here, but it always has been. I think what ends up happening is Australian artists end up being ambassadors to the rest of the world, and
Yes.
end up being Hollywood movie stars um, as they sort of outgrow the industry here. But there's incredible work, and I think lately in Sydney there's actually an extraordinary amount of independent work of people just finding ways to produce work on their own. Um,
Oh,
it's a really sort of thriving indie scene, separate from the major companies.
oh, great.
But that's sort of the culture I grew out of.
Great. And So you just told me that the theaters were are back. I know this is where are we now? We're in January of 2021, and just in the midst of this COVID. And you said that you're allowed to go to theaters in Sydney.
Yeah, so the theaters, I would say the theaters sort of came back couple of months ago. They started opening with a slightly reduced capacity. Um, and in fact, we have the Sydney Festival running right now, which has a huge range of different productions across theater, dance, and music. And um, everything's sort of reduced capacity and everyone has to wear masks. Um, but the the country's just done an incredible job of mitigating the pandemic with
Right.
contact tracing and quarantining, and
Okay.
so it's never got out of control here. I would say we've had a couple of lockdowns in order to get it under control, but yeah, thankfully we've managed to reopen theater right now, and everyone's sort of hoping that will stick. So.
Yes, that's great. And before we go on to this play, I wanted to ask Alaina, how is it you're studying a collaborative art and you are studying writing and directing. And how does that happen in quarantine?
Yeah, it's so interesting. When this first happened, we all thought, it was only going to be for 2 weeks or so. And then, we get an email, it's going to be for a little bit longer. And then, we finally got that email in March, officiating that we were going to be officially, all online via Zoom. And, same with these past 2 semesters. It's funny, at first a lot of us were really really against doing a lot of this on Zoom. It's scary, it was new, it's something that's never been done before. But eventually, after some conversation and collaboration, it really has actually proven to be extremely rewarding. It's really cool, being able to study at Marymount. We're fortunate enough to get a lot of tickets to go out and see theater. And in the past few years, we've been, seeing the kind of intersection between digitalization in theater and video and media in theater, whether it's part of the plot or in the set or whatnot. So going forward, it's cool to see the work that we've all created and collaborated on, and hopefully to kind of push that towards the future of theater, and further incorporate this new medium in our work.
Well, I was looking at your resume, and so now we're going to start talking about your plays. Your
Okay.
plays seem to have a funny streak to them. So I saw one that is called the microwave play, and one
Yes.
that is called banana bread tastes better when it's ripe, right?
Yeah.
So most of those are comedy, and yet this one is is very sad and um, and doleful. And I was wondering does that how did you find that voice,
Mhm.
and how does that voice feel? Because it's a really big shift in your playwriting voice.
Mhm. Definitely. Um, First, I'd like to say, so it may seem that, the other plays are comedy because of their titles, and they are, kind of funny. I'd like to see, my original playwriting started off as kind of, seeing the world through various of lenses, and just kind of, writing these characters and, kind of blunt ways, which, of course, on stage and sometimes reads, is very comical. This play, though, I mean, I found a little bit more of a dramatic voice, I would say, just out of being in quarantine and, being in isolation. And often a lot of my writing is I like to take bits and pieces of the world, around me, things maybe that my friends say or that I overhear, as at a coffee shop or something. And then I, dramatize them, and make them, funny and very palatable in some ways. This play, though, is a little bit of a different turn because I was having to sit with myself in quarantine, and often the only voice that I was, hearing or talking with, was myself. So while it was a very difficult time, I'm very grateful for the chance to kind of tap into that more dramatic side of my writing.
Well, and on top to further that, it's not just a sad play, but you go what you just said that makes sense because it really is like you're going into the interior of this mother's mind
Mhm.
and seeing the world and her world through that. So, can you talk to me about how you? I mean, it's a really beautiful perspective. And so, can you tell me a little bit about the inspiration for the play, or the genesis, or how you in your young life could go there to this woman's grief and pain.
Sure. Um, Something that I try to, discover a little bit in my writing is, the difference between public and private. And often, Lou in her mind, it's a very private space, that, she really, really shares, with herself. And, obviously she finds Libby in that space eventually. I would definitely say that this story was inspired by a lot of experiences that I dealt with in my household as a child, and kind of, growing up as an adult in various living situations that I found myself in. And I think there's something really special about what is spoken and what is unspoken, and the secrets that we keep to ourselves and the ones that we choose to share with others. And oftentimes within the subtext of the play, I really tried to weave in um, the emotions of each of these family members without giving away exactly what they were feeling, but in a way showing, their emotions, ones that were both on the surface and underneath, in kind of a cyclical way that, made sense for that specific household.
Okay, nice. Um, so Craig, this play was written for the stage, and tell me about the process for adapting this to film. I see clearly, and all the techniques that you use to both transpose it from stage to film, and then we'll talk a little bit about the mother's vision and how you captured that.
Yeah, I think this the prompt for this, right, was as part of the Impossible Plays
Yeah.
um, uh, cycle, which sort of suggests, I think, a play that might be impossible to stage in a way. But what was really exciting about what Alaina did, I think, was use the sense of time and space that you get in the theater um, to write a play about the experience of grief. And the experience of grief really changes your perception of time and space, I think. And I think that's what Alaina has sort of captured so gorgeously. And in the theater, uh, you really cannot, it's very difficult to create a very specific sense of real time. I mean, without a character saying, what time is it? Oh, it's 4:44. So you see in Elena's writing, she creates sort of real markers of time, which in the theater sort of needs dialogue. I mean, of course, you can do it a little bit with lighting. That's sort of general daytime or nighttime or twilight, or um, uh, in film, the time becomes super specific when you're shooting a scene, in the middle of the day. You get all these indications of the time. You can literally shoot the sun at high noon in the sky. Film becomes a recording of the time at which you shoot it. Whereas in theater, space and time are imaginary in a way, or we create them with our imagination. Um, so putting it on film, it was actually really helpful to do it with Zoom in a way, because the Zoom square is such an empty square. Like there's no signifiers in the Zoom square to tell me, where I am. In fact, this is probably a digression, but I have a friend who, another Australian friend who's living in America, who her job in America, she has her own business basically, but she's been talking to all her clients from Australia, but for various reasons didn't want them to know she was in Australia. and so she has had to mimic the time of day it is on her Zoom call in New York while she's calling from Sydney. So she had to like close all the blinds to, make it look like nighttime at certain points. She's also had to like wear sweaters, so that it looks like it's cold, even though it's middle of summer. But what's interesting about that story is all the signifiers she used in this little square to create a sense of time, right? So what I really tried to embrace was actually the emptiness of this square and the lack of signifiers of time. Um, so that when we cut it together, you don't get a sense of, I think what you feel is sort of the ongoing life of a family, and it could be any time of day or night.
Mhm.
Um, and we even sort of stripped away, David Crandall, who did the amazing music and sound design.
Yeah.
Um, he asked me at one point, at one point, there's the line, "Oh, when did all these people get here?" That Lou has, the mother, and he asked me, should we hear like the voices of those people? And I sort of said, no, I think, I think we want to take away anything that ties us to a literal time and space. And sort of strip the visual and the sound elements of anything that sort of gives us too much specific reality. Because then I think you're in Lou's mind as she experiences grief and sort of loses, we say that phrase, you lose your grip on reality, right? And I think that's losing your sense of time, losing your sense of other people in the space. And so that was sort of the goal in making the visual language.
What I there are a couple of parts of the technical things that you use, but what I loved is that it made me feel as if her mind, how she saw that she only saw the world, and the world was getting smaller and smaller, right? She had, and the dream world's getting bigger and bigger and more vivid to her, right? But also, she's only that. I love the fact that sometimes you only see the husband's mouth or somebody's eye because that's really all at the moment she's taking in, right? She's just taking in that because she really wants to go or she's getting pulled someplace else. So that was really, and then we have only half their faces, the son and the husband, and so clearly her mind is shrinking and or or kind of blitzing here and there. So that was, I loved that section. I loved that. Now, so I want to know that you had these other techniques. You also had some rotoscoping in there, and um, and then you put two Zoom pictures together, which I really loved. Obviously, those two people were being filmed in different places, but was able to put that back. So, can you just talk about actually the little different techniques that you used to bring this kind of yes, and you just have a little slab of light. It was as if she's really already narrowed in what she can see. So, talk about the techniques, please.
Yeah, I mean, Elena's script sort of brought up a few questions. I mean, one of the big ones was Libby, the daughter, is talking from the afterlife in some way, or after her death in some way. And so there's some really traditional visual ways the afterlife has been represented, glowing light or a halo or floating in the clouds. They all seemed not related to Libby or to the story. And Libby keeps wanting to sort of change the channel or say next. And I sort of thought of her age and her generation and the way they interact with the world, and imagined that she could sort of become this slightly digital creature that she's sort of exited into a world where she can swipe her experience like you would on a phone,
Yeah.
and tap, um, and so part of the visual idea, it was sort of related to rotoscoping, I suppose, was just to make her more digital and
Yeah.
less real in her appearance. Uh, so that was that. Um, uh, I think the other thing I did was sort of jump cut in the middle of words sometimes. again, just to sort of give an experience of time that's fragmented and that um, that moves in unexpected ways, uh, almost like it's happening to Lou, so she can't quite get her control on it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Every time she asks what time it is, we jump ahead, you know,
Yeah.
so she never knows exactly when it is.
Yeah.
Um, uh, what else did I do? Oh, and then I think the other sort of visual language was related to sort of photos, and I tried to sort of play with the saturation of those photos. So they lived in a very, uh, almost blue and white world. So instead of
Hmm.
black and white, a sort of bluish, um, uh, which is sort of related to old film stock and
Yeah.
the way it turns sort of blue. Um, and then sort of tried to drain even more color out of those sometimes as they went. And that was sort of to me about memory. Um, so much of this play is about something that happened in the past. Um, and so uh, was sort of trying to invoke memory with this sort of old photographic language, visual language as it went.
Yeah, I felt that there was I mean there's also the fact that that it's sort of black and white and you have different uh, different sets of close up. I just felt it was there were so many old, it seemed like an old 50s 60s experimental film in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely sort of influenced by Bergman and
Yeah.
filmmakers like that. I, and the French New Wave kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it was really fun to start playing with the technique and also sort of realize how much you learn just from like someone's mouth. And our visual language in TV these days particularly is such a sort of head and shoulders shot. And we think we have to see all this in very like creamy, perfect lighting and
Yeah.
you know, uh, insanely, luminous colors, and
Yeah.
like we have such clear visual, but in a way that sort of lacks tension, and there's a really nice tension to not getting all the visual information.
Right. You
What
just
you have to do as an audience member with your imagination to fill in the rest of the visual information.
yeah.
It was really fun to play with that. Yeah.
Oh, great. And Alaina, since you wrote it for the stage and had a certain set of images, I'm sure in your head, what was your experience at watching this take of your play?
Yeah, I mean, it was really great. I think that this format lends itself to really allow for some things in the script. Craig was talking, about time and whatnot. Those, cues of the time to be really, really cut and to be really, really smooth in a way that maybe, would not be able to happen on stage, which is so cool. And I really love like the working with like the different filters and taking out the color of them to illuminate how Lou was losing her memory throughout that. And that's not something you can't necessarily take away color from a stage, but you can manipulate the cools and the warms and the tones with various lighting fixtures. Yeah, it was really great. I mean, we're still able to do some things that we're able to do on a stage, like the blackout in between each of the scenes, and to add in the compositions, underscoring and through the transitions and whatnot. Um, but it was really great to see it in this format. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Great. Well, um, so I guess I just want to, that was interesting, and I'm glad that we had some insights into that. And I just want to ask a little bit about like what's next. I guess for you, Elena, what's next is graduation.
Yes. Yes, graduation in May. And then, after that, in terms of theater in the United States, it is, kind of a waiting game, as we get the vaccines. But I hope just to continue to write and create and collaborate and, get my work out there.
And send us more work, right?
Yes, of course, of
Send us
course.
more work. And Craig, what's going on for you in Australia?
Yeah, I will absolutely answer that. But I also wanted to say I taught at Marymount for a few years as
Oh,
an adjunct theater professor.
okay.
So it's been really nice to get this chance to work with someone who, I would consider sort of almost a graduate. It's a fantastic program there with really great people working on it. So um,
Wonderful. I'm glad I brought you two together. How great is that?
yeah. Um, what am I doing next? So I'm working on a production of, oh, sorry, you hear the Australian birds in the background there. I'm working on a production of Samuel Beckett's Happy Days that will come in a few months at the Old Fitz Theatre here
Nice.
in Sydney, which is really, Happy Days was the play I kept thinking of all through
Yes.
this weird experience we're going through, like, quarantines, like being buried to your waist in the earth and trying to live your regular day. um, and I'm doing a production with drama students here at the Actors Center, a production of Romeo and Juliet, which is a delight to do, to work with students again.
That's great. And I know you from your work here at Shakespeare. So, well, you're going back to your roots at Shakespeare. So that's nice too.
Yeah,
So,
it's nice to do some Shakespeare, yeah.
thank you very much for spending a half an hour talking to us about this play and how you guys went about um, uh, bringing it to life. I really appreciate the time and good luck.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.